Welcome to Picture Healer channel. Today we are going to look at the Plum Blossom I-Ching. This is a very famous school for I-Ching divination. But the Plum Blossom School of I-Ching, or the Mei Hua Yi, is different from traditional I-Ching fortune telling. The traditional way of coming up with I-Ching hexagram is by using sticks and do calculation from that. Or a modified version is to use 3 coins. And there are many different variations of that method. The Plum Blossom I-Ching is very different in the way of casting the hexagrams. Since the 64 hexagrams in I-Ching is based on the Bagua, the 8 trigrams, and all the related theories such as yin-yang, 5 element, or 洛书. So everything in this world can have a correspondence to any of these elements. So the Plum Blossom I-Ching is very flexible. In a way, it's very easy. It seems very straightforward. But on the other hand, it seems not having a certain logic, so it can be difficult for beginners. Let's start by talking about the original author of this book for the Plum Blossom I-Ching Divination. His name is Xiao Yong from North Song Dynasty. He is a great scholar, philosopher, and very knowledgeable person. He also wrote several books, including the Plum Blossom I-Ching Divination, and another famous book is Huangji Jingshi. That's also a divination book based on the I-Ching. There is a very famous story of how he come up with the hexagram from just observing the surroundings. One day he saw some birds fell down from the tree. He thought it's odd, and he did some association of the sight and the sound and come up with a hexagram. And he predicted that a girl will fall and injure her ankles the next day. And he did that without using the coins or sticks. So that can sound magical or difficult to believe. So how does he come up with an I-Ching hexagram to predict the future? In the Mei Hua or the Plum Blossom I-Ching, everything can be used as an element for the hexagram. When we look at the hexagram, there are basically 2 parts, the upper part and the bottom. There are 6 lines. The 3 lines on the top can be one of the Bagua or the trigrams, and the same on the bottom 3 lines. So it's a combination of these 2 Bagua that create basic 64 hexagrams in I-Ching. So when do you start notice the surroundings and come up with your hexagram? According to his theory, usually when something unusual is happening surrounding you, maybe something seems odd or some strange sound. For example, the bird falls down suddenly, or a dog barks at an unusual time, or some unusual sights or sounds that catch your attention. And that's a good time to come up with a hexagram and try to predict what is going to happen. Even though it sounds like it doesn't have a base or logic, but there is a basic formula you can follow. And in a way, this is similar to the traditional I-Ching divination, because we have Bagua, the 8 symbols. So when we decide the upper gua and the lower gua, we can use the associated number or the number you observe during certain time and divide by 8. We will come up with a number and a remainder, and the remainder will be less than 8. So we can use a number to decide the gua number. And another concept is a changing line. When we use the coin method or the stick method, sometimes the line can be the changing line. That means yin becomes yang and yang becomes yin, and it creates a new hexagram. So how do we come up with that changing line in the Plum Blossom I-Ching? It's very simple. Instead of divide the number by 8, we can divide the number by 6, and we will use the remainder as the Yao number. So we know which line is a changing line. Because when we divide the number by 6, the remainder will be less than 6. So that's the basic formula for coming up with a hexagram in the Plum Blossom I-Ching. We will look at some popular cases for coming up the hexagram. The first one is by the date, or the year, day, and hour. You probably know the Chinese traditional calendar is based on the 10 heavenly stem and 12 earthly branches, and totally has 60 combinations. So for the I-Ching divination, we are also based on the traditional calendar. For example, when we look at the year, we can look at the earthly branches. And there are 12 earthly branches. It's also corresponding to the 12 animal signs. So this year we have tiger. That's the third animal sign. It starts from the red, ox, and tiger. So the tiger is number 3. So we got one number here. The months and day are based on the lunar calendar. So whatever the number of the day or the month, that's the number we can use to calculate the hexagram. And for the hour, it's also following the traditional system. The modern 24 hours are divided into 12 sections. So each section is 2 hours. And it starts from the 11 p.m. to 1 o'clock in the morning. That's the Zi hour. And from 1 to 3 is the Chou hour. From 3 to 5 is the Yin hour. So there are charts you can refer to if it's a lot of information and difficult to remember. You can always look at charts. Another popular way is to use dimensions or measurements. So you can use feet and inches, or you can use any unit you use locally. For example, if you see an item is 5 feet 3 inches, we can use the 5 as the upper gua, and the 3 can be the lower gua. And if it's more than 8, you can divide it by 8 and use the remainder as the gua number. And for the changing line, you can combine both upper gua and lower gua number, plus the current time, and divide the total amount by 6 to find the remainder. For example, we add the upper gua number 5 and the lower gua number 3, and the time you are doing the divination. For example, it's number 8, so together is 16. 16 divided by 6, we have 2, and the remainder is number 4. So the fourth line is the changing line. And we always calculate from the bottom up. So we come up with a new hexagram. That should be the final result. Another method is to use directions. Since we talk about Feng Shui a lot, you probably know the Chinese map with the north on the bottom and the south on the top, the east on the left side and the west on the right side. So you can divide it into 8 directions. Depends on the movement of certain direction. You can use that direction and the corresponding number as the gua number. There are many other ways to come up with a number, and the principles are the same. We observe something different and take notice and see related number or any repetition. Maybe it's the dog barking several times, or you see 3 animals passing by. Those are all significant numbers you can use to come up with your hexagram. And if the number is bigger than 8, we divide it by 8 and use the remainder. The first one you observe is the top gua, and the second item you observe can be the lower gua. And you can also use timing of the observation. You can add that into the lower gua and also divide it by 8. And for the changing line, you often combine with the timing and both upper and lower gua together and divide it by 6 to find the remainder. Another way is to look at animals and associate them with the numbers. The animals can correspond to the 12 animal signs. You can see this is a very flexible method. There's no limit to what you can use to come up with your hexagram. So the advantage is that it has a lot of freedom. You can interpret it freely, and you are not limited to certain tools such as coins or sticks. And the negative side is pretty obvious. Unless you have a deep understanding of all the theories, it's hard to associate what you see with Bagua or I-Ching, so the prediction can be off. I do like the Plum Blossom I-Ching Divination because the traditional one can sometimes be difficult to understand and it can be rigid. With Plum Blossom I-Ching, you have more flexibility. And I think a successful prediction or fortune telling all comes from your sincere mind. When you are fully focused and you practice a lot, you will have more accurate result. After you come up with your hexagram and the changing line for the new hexagram, the next part is to find the meaning of the hexagram. And I'm working on writing the book of the 64 hexagrams. So that will be a good reference if you just want to find answers for your everyday questions. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.